This month is Women's History Month, and to celebrate and honor that, I want to share with you 4 women composers that just absolutely changed everything for me about music composition and left an unmistakable, unquestionable influence and impression on me. Then we'll round things out today with someone that isn't necessarily a historical figure, but someone that's absolutely making history as we speak. And that person changed everything I thought I knew about being a performer, and lots more. So stick around and we'll take a look at 5 absolute legends today. So I'm going to go chronologically with these composers, which is also coincidentally the order in which I first discovered them. So we'll start out at the very beginning with the composer that I learned about first through a music history class at Berkeley. Now, these music history classes were certainly not something very interesting for me. A lot of the topics were, totally not my thing. Very boring, very monotonous, and many classes I will openly admit I couldn't help but fall asleep through. But there would be an occasional moment where the professor would say a few key words that would really get my interest going and make me sit up and pay attention. And this next composer was one of those moments when I started hearing phrases like mystic and a composer that was receiving these musical ideas and visions directly from God. I immediately wanted to know who this was, more about them, and to hear some of this. Well, of course, that was Saint Hildegard, Hildegard Von Bingen. The Catholic Church has thankfully made her a saint, so now she's Saint Hildegard as far as I'm concerned. But I was totally not prepared for what music came out of those speakers when he turned it on. It was the most complex music I'd ever heard. I was not expecting that at all. And it was really amazing and eye-opening to me to hear that. I was just absolutely mesmerized and enthralled by it. I just really, really enjoyed hearing her music, and especially to know if she was such a prolific person, far beyond music. It seems like she was in. I've read she's in politics at that time, in many different academic fields. I don't know much about this era. It's definitely not my era of expertise in music, but I have certainly enjoyed listening to everything I have found of performances of her music. Now, on that topic, many, or the majority, I should say, of these performances try to interpret her music to be as stylistically accurate as possible, which I think is a very impossible task, but nonetheless, they try that, and they try their best to do perhaps how it would have sounded when she was composing it. But I want to draw your attention to a very different approach. This was an album that came out on ECM Records, and this album takes, like I said, the exact opposite approach. They treat it as if Saint Hildegard wrote this piece for them, recently, a few days ago, and they commissioned it. So they take some liberties with it. They take a very modern approach to it. I think it's a very fascinating idea to do this. If you have heard this, I'm curious what you think of their rendition. If you haven't, I definitely suggest you to listen to it, but I'd also suggest you to make like an A-B comparison and go and get another version of the same piece and see what you think between the two. But absolutely, St. Hildegard's music, just that moment in class, I'll never forget that. What a terrific visionary, for sure, no question. And as I was scrolling Instagram yesterday, I came across a chapel in Germany named after her, and it's in my favorite architectural style of all time. So now I really have to go visit this to celebrate Saint Hildegard, but also to see such a beautiful chapel at the same time. So I got to do that as soon as we can travel again. First stop. Well, I certainly didn't start out to make another ECM subsequent video about ECM Records, but ironically, that's kind of the direction this video is taking. Simply because all of these amazing women composers and performers have had their music on ECM Records, so I give a huge thanks to ECM for including such prolific people on their roster and publishing such incredible music from these fine composers. That certainly is the case with the next composer, who was absolutely the cause of a huge turning point in my compositional studies, and that is the amazing Galina Ustvolskaya. Well, I know I've talked about her in at least one video, maybe even two videos before, but I cannot emphasize enough what an impact she had on me. Not only as a composer, her music spoke volumes to me and really changed a lot about how I saw music and composition, but also who she was as a person. That can absolutely never be overstated, how she was as a person. She nearly sacrificed her life to pursue the style of music that she wanted to pursue her artistic sensibilities. At the time, the Soviet Union was very clearly dictating what type of music or art you would create, and had she followed those rules, she'd probably be as common of a name as Shostakovich, etc. right now. But she didn't. She didn't follow their rules, and I am ever so thankful for her, because as a result, her music is leaps and bounds so much more interesting than any of her colleagues at that time. She didn't have any of that. She didn't follow any of those rules. And unfortunately, as a result, she became a very obscure figure for quite some time. I think there's now quite a interest in her music, but for the longest time, she was a pretty unknown figure. And from what I have read, unfortunately died in poverty, which is really disappointing because she was such an incredible composer. She made me realize one thing about what I'm really looking for when I hear composed music, and what I'm trying to do as a composer myself, and that is to express authentic, pure authentic emotion. Sure, a lot of composers can really compose and harvest emotions, but it's done on purpose to, like, match a sad section in a movie, for example, or match a happy section, or to write a thematic piece of music. Well, Ustvolskaya's music was personal, and it was really deep and very heartfelt. The emotion she put in there, when you hear this pain and suffering and tension, that wasn't composed in there just, from a thematic piece. It was composed because that was her life, and it wasn't fake at all. It was true, authentic, real emotion. I will contend I do not believe there has ever been, or probably ever will be, a composer in classical music who has put in such true, genuine emotion as Galina Ustvolskaya. First, I fell in love with her music, but then as soon as I learned about who she was, I immediately had a huge admiration and respect for her life and the hardship she faced for pursuing her creativity and her art. The first recording I ever heard of Ustvolskaya's music was her clarinet trio on this fine ECM Recordings right here. I nearly jumped for joy when I heard this because I had been hearing similar music, a similar style in my head, and I was not getting very far with pursuing it with my professors. They weren't thrilled with what I was trying to write. And when I heard her music, it gave me the confidence to keep going. It gave me the confidence to develop my own compositional voice, no matter what anyone said or thought about it. Her music was really a serious turning point, not only stylistically, but just from a personal level too. I really owe a lot to Galina Ustvolskaya. The next artist I really started listening a lot to was someone else that had an array of albums on ECM Records, and that's Meredith Monk. And actually, I'm quite surprised how quickly I fell in love with her music, because the way in which my professors were describing her, as well as music critics, I was reading a few blurbs here and there, they just described her in a way in which I didn't think it would really be something I'd like. The music critics, I always kept seeing them use the word pop in reference to Meredith Monk, like it's a pop person in classical music, etc. So I said, no, that's really not something I'm into, but because she was mentioned in one of my classes, I said, and I also saw she was on ECM, I said, okay, I want to take a listen to this. So I put in one of her albums, turned it on, and 3 hours later I found that I was still sitting in the same spot, listening to it and looking for more albums, because I just absolutely loved it. Then I think it was the next year, during winter break, when everyone else went back home, I stayed in Boston, which was basically a ghost town at that point, and got a few more of her albums on ECM, and that was my winter vacation. I turned that on and gave some serious listening time to that, and just was absolutely mesmerized. Monk, both figuratively and literally, provides an amazing new voice to classical music. She brings in such a wide array of influences and styles and approaches, technique to classical music. She has forever changed the way in which we think about approaching classical music, especially for the voice, but also through her instrumental work as well. And she's also done something really amazing. She has tackled some seriously deep and tough to talk about topics such as loss or death, mourning, various things like that. Her most recent album talked about nature, preserving nature, and the impeding crisis we're facing with that. This is stuff that maybe other composers would like to talk about, or maybe they don't like to talk about, but never have. And she, instead of not trying it, she instead embraced it and tackled it and just delivered some amazing work about some really difficult topics. So not only is her music incredible, I think it's just so amazing that she was able to really think about and put these topics out for the audience and for the listener. She has made so many contributions to modern music and composition. We're going to be processing her contributions for many, many years. The final composer I want to talk about today is someone that actually took me a bit longer to really get into than I expected, but I'm very thankful that I put the time in to listening to her work, because I really love it a lot now, and that is, of course, Sofia Gubaidulina, and I do apologize if I mispronounced that name. Her work is just absolutely amazing, but it's very nuanced and detailed. And that takes a lot of attention, which is something I don't always have a lot of. And so it kind of put a little bit of a block for me discovering her music right off the bat. But I want to give a bit of a story how that came to be. So when I was a student back in Boston, there was some weird coincidental miracle of scheduling, and her piece, Garden of Joys and Sorrows for viola, flute, and harp, was programmed at least 3 times, I think, in 1 week, and it might have been a workshop or something as well. You could see it a lot that week, I'll say. And simultaneously, I think a professor also mentioned it in one of my classes. So there was a lot of just like everything lined up all of a sudden for this one piece of music. So I said, okay, great. I went to the first one was on Monday night, and I went to that Monday night concert. And it was okay. It didn't move me. It wasn't really a huge, experience for me. I said, okay, that's okay, but it certainly wasn't, standard style of music I would really enjoy. But it was programmed again on Wednesday, and I said, well, I'll give it another try. And I think they had some other pieces that concert, so I said, okay, I'll go and come anyways. So I show up on Wednesday, and already during that second listen, even like as the piece was going, things were starting to make more sense. It was starting to become a lot more enjoyable, and I was noticing a lot more nuances that I missed the first time I heard it. Then the next performance was the very next day, on Thursday, and I can tell you I was nearly jumping up and down waiting to go to that concert on Thursday. I was so excited because something had clicked, and I finally was beginning to really appreciate what an incredible composition this was. I immediately started calling up my friends and saying, hey, we gotta go to this concert to hear this piece. And by that third performance, a lot was really making sense at that point, and I really had an immediate understanding of what a complete genius she is. And I know we use this word a lot with things, kind of exaggerate sometimes, but I'm not exaggerating in this example. I truly believe she is a pure compositional genius. She knows how to get sounds and tones out of instruments that I think the majority of professional performers don't even know how to get out of their own instruments. The sounds she was getting out of a flute, viola, and harp were like none I had ever heard before. And then especially the 3 of those instruments together created just such an amazing, fascinating composition. And it just instantly proved what a pure compositional, brilliant genius she is with her music. And that was not, and I'll say about that piece then, ECM, of course, also has that released on one of their albums, and I had to go out and buy that immediately so I could listen to the piece later, when I got the CD, that way I could continue to hear it after the performances had passed. Incredible piece of music, but that's not the only time that has happened with me and her music. A lot of her pieces are typically written for pretty dense instrumentation, a pretty big, amount of people, and they're very detailed pieces. So the first time, I think perhaps you'll have the same experience, but certainly for me, the very first time I heard it, that's like your warm up. Then the second or third or fourth, etc. times, then that's when it starts to become really, really enjoyable. So I highly recommend you check out any of her pieces. They're all wonderful, and really put in the time to enjoy and appreciate them. You'll be very glad you did. Well, the above four composers, two of them are still living and still making incredible music to this day, but they've all left us with a massive amount of material to digest and to learn about. They've added so many new ideas and new pieces to the canon of classical music that we're going to really be processing all this information for many more lifetimes to come. But there's a musician currently performing that is helping us make sense of all of these composers, and that is the incredible virtuosa Patricia Kopatchinskaja. She has recorded some of the pieces that from the above composers. She was on the Galina Ustvolskaya ECM release. She is just absolutely a prolific performer and composer as well, an arranger, programmer, all of these things. Like any role in music she does, and she does it so much better than it's just absolutely incredible. And again, I mean no exaggeration, but I will make the claim that she is probably the greatest violinist that has ever existed. And I say that because of one very important factor. If you would take a stack of, let's say, 100 CDs or 100 vinyl LPs and find a standard piece of music in classical music, like a Beethoven piece, for example, and you put them on, for sure at least half of those will sound identical. Maybe a few of the more prominent violinists, if you would choose, would have more recognizable characteristics, maybe their tone or something. But by and large, the majority of these recordings will sound very, very similar, because all these performers are performing with the idea that you have to follow some type of interpretational rules for this music, like it's super sacred music. You can't touch it. You can't do anything different than the last person did. Well, finally, after all that time, there's a new recording of one of these pieces if it's from Patricia Kopatchinskaja, it's guaranteed not going to sound like any of those people. It only sounds like one person, her. And that is exactly what I have been wanting as a listener, as part of the audience. I have wanted to hear that for so long. I don't want to hear another interpretation of Beethoven that is supposedly following some interpretational rules set by who knows who. She does it however she sees fit. And every recording, it could be Bach, it could be Beethoven, it could be John Cage, it could be bluegrass perhaps, and it sounds only like her. And it sounds like her every time. And that is just absolutely, for me, what makes her the greatest violinist ever. That is without a doubt. Not only is she such a prolific and virtuosic violinist, she's also a true genius when it comes to programming concerts. When she's hired for an avant-garde festival, she'll slip in a romantic classical piece at the end. When she's performing like for a Beethoven festival, she'll put in some John Cage or Heinz Holliger at the end. She's always doing that. Maybe she's doing it to be a little bit fun, but she's also doing it for a very serious purpose, which is to introduce these audiences that are so laser focused in one style, introduce them to something that they might like if they would just give it a chance, but oftentimes they're not giving it a chance. Well, she does that. And I can say for myself, there's been some pieces that she's recorded that I would have absolutely never voluntarily listened to, but when she played it and when she programmed it in with pieces I did like, I walked away saying, wow, that's really good music, I love it. So she has an extraordinary vision as a programmer. For concerts, she has an extraordinary vision as a violinist, as an arranger, as a record producer. I think for sure she will be viewed in the future as one of the greatest figures of the 21st century, is without a doubt. Her playing is magnificent, her ideas are magnificent, and you probably know you're doing the right thing when you've angered all of these music police, all the music critics. Just think it's so horrible that she's not following the rules on interpretation of these classic pieces. Well, if they're all angry, then probably she's doing the right thing. She's being herself, she's being unique, and she's a very important voice to classical music. Without people like her, this music will just simply die. It will not continue. But people like her keep it really invigorated and introduce it to new audiences. So I really appreciate Patricia Kopatchinskaja so much, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for watching today. Please go out and check all 5 of these wonderful, amazing women. They're all so great. And I can absolutely say that I would not be the person I am today. I would not be the composer or performer I am today if it were not for these 5 people. I cannot thank them enough for their huge influence they've had on me. Absolutely. So I'm not celebrating them just for 1 month. I'm celebrating them every day. So join me as we celebrate these 5 amazing women.